and this is my Let's Play of Tyranny. We have just finished having a lengthy chat with Barrick, and we still gotta talk to Lantry and our newest companion, Ebb, and then we gotta report into Tunon as well. So let's see here. It's been way too long, I forgot how to have conversations. It's here somewhere. Wait, it's here. No. It should be more obvious to me. Also, I did have conversations with two of them before. Oh, it's just like that. Gotcha. Yeah, okay.
At least in theory, I'm supposed to be observing history and not getting myself wrapped into it. All the same, this is the thrill of a lifetime. Rarely does one stand so close to monumental moments in the making. If given the choice between a multifaceted hive mind of treachery and a surly old soldier, General Grumps is the wiser choice. It's patently obvious which Archon is truly loyal to Kairos.
Well, you would reckon the hive mind of treachery is a little more treacherous.
So, I must ask, are you planning on taking sides in the Civil War? Or do you have other plans?
Well, my loyalty ultimately lies to Tunon, that has not changed.
Dutifully spoken. It is Tunon's duty to arbitrate matters between the Archons, so this rift between Ash and Narat certainly falls under his jurisdiction. And here you are, thrust in the middle of the dispute. No doubt the mighty adjudicator will be relying heavily on you to get to the truth of the matter. Whatever you do next, consider that many eyes will be upon you, for you have both delivered and taken away the Overlord's edicts, and few will know how to make sense of the latter. You are an exception the Archons cannot afford to ignore. They will likely aim to control or destroy you.
Have you heard of the edicts being broken before?
Most of Kairos' edicts were either worded to end in a manner of the Overlord's choosing, or the edicts have simply continued in perpetuity. That's not to say there haven't been stories of broken edicts. They're just uncommon. The oldest is, I think, Golbraith and the Edict of Sorrows, and that tale dates back to around the year 110. Aside from you, the most recent was the Edict of Twisting Grasses, back in 380.
Kairos is creative with these edicts, huh?
In all these stories, Kairos' edict very clearly gives its victim a single way to escape, and someone manages it. What's never happened is the pure abatement of an edict, like using a spell of warding or cancellation.
To be fair, we also fulfilled the means of escape as worded, so... Alright, noted. Let's get going. No, wait. Stop further. So what's on your mind? Did you want to discuss matters of the present, or would you prefer a more scholarly rant? How about current matters?
Of course. How can I help?
You know anything about the region we're in?
The spires predate us all. As far as I know, we're the only ones who've been up here since... ever? I think this might be a first. Perhaps the real Trailblazer had trouble getting down and was lost to history.
Possible.
Of course. How can I help?
How do you feel about our associates?
Are you asking for an objective assessment? Or is this your way of saying you want to gossip?
What do you make of Barrick?
He is a proper Northman, with duty in his blood, which makes me suspect his loyalty to Ash is stronger than his loyalty to you. As long as your interests remain aligned to Graven Ash, this shouldn't be an issue. I must admit, I am completely fascinated by his predicament. Ever tried diagramming the articulations of his armor? Don't. It'll only lead to madness and ruination.
I see. A verse.
I know little of swordplay, and couldn't work a curve and arrow to save my life. I can't really comment on the lady.
Lady, you're just afraid to talk in front of me, clear as day. Your sweat is easier to read than your ink scribbles.
No, not at all. I just don't know how to comment on a warrior's worth, that's all.
He's terrified of her. All right.
Spare me your blather.
First pauses to read Lantry's body language.
Huh. Think that, do you? Didn't know you had such swollen hope for me.
No need to keep secrets, Lantry.
A most fascinating specimen. I think she has great potential. A dangerous amount of potential, to be blunt. The Scarlet Furies are the fighting elite of the Scarlet Chorus, and that means floating to the top of a sea of blood and chum. We should consider ourselves lucky to have her on our side, with her weapons usually pointed away from us.
Fair enough. Badeb.
Good tidecasters stay underwater. Kairos did the Tears a favor by erasing those moon howlers from history. A shame one of them escaped justice.
Okay, they must be from rifle schools.
I like that I make you this agitated. Considering all the things that don't seem to bother you in the slightest. I'm not gonna lie. I'm kind of getting off on how much power you're giving me here.
Okay, Eb.
And then there's your coquettish act whenever someone calls you on your teeth. I'll be the one ready to tangle when, and not if, you decide to pounce.
Alright, let's talk about something else.
Of course. How can I help?
I'm taking a lot of notes. What about?
All kinds of things. My mind is old, memory's a sieve. Keeping track of you, noting what I hear of the war, scribbling down reminders to myself, that sort of thing.
It's safe to write on your arms? That he writes it all on his arms?
Oh, certainly not. But it depends on the ink I'm using. Too much cerulean and I can't sleep. But just the right amount, and I can write all night. The red ink will give you swamp bottom if you drink it, but absorbed through the skin, it'll make you taste colors and smell music. Speaking of which, I should change out my tip.
Sounds like you should not be writing this on your skin, Lantry, but okay.
I use 3 kinds: sepia, cerulean, and a red that's never the same shade. My recipe needs work. I like having 3 colors, but they also provide different states of mind for writing.
Alright, let's talk about something else. Got some questions.
I am nothing if not a semi-reliable font of knowledge. What did you want to discuss?
I'd like to know more about you. Me? Well, fine, but I'm not a very fascinating subject. I study interesting people, enough to know I'm not one of them. Well, what's your story? What are the origins of Lantry? Someday, someone half your age will ask you to sum up your life, and you'll realize what an odious request that is. Well, where to start? I grew up in Sunder. I was born right after independence from the realm of Stalwart, so yeah, do the math and you'll realize I'm old. In a treaty that ended with the firm stipulation that Sunder chose to leave and that Stalwart did not lose a civil war, the free city of Sunder marks 347 TR as its year of independence. He's pretty spry for 84. Dang, 84. My parents were harbor hands. My mother never returned from a voyage, and my father lost his hand to infection and decided to sell me to the School of Ink and Quills. Any other family? Irrelevant. If they exist, they are as strangers. Family ties are severed when joining with the sages. At least in principle, the school has had its share of favoritism for blood relatives. As a novice, I was assigned to the Dovecotes, where I learned how to raise and groom birds to carry missives, and most of my early tomes are on that subject. 10 years and several tomes later, someone decided I was ready to be welcomed into the inner circle and shown the ways of magic. And since then, I've spent a great deal of time in field study, which I suppose readied me for life after the fall of the Vellum Citadel. Well, as much as anything could ready one for the strangeness of those days. Were you born Lantry, or did you take that name after joining the School of Ink and Quill? Most sages take a new name when they join the school, but for me the transition was difficult at first. I stuck to my old commoner name and then just never got around to picking some highfalutin name like Sage Apophasis or Sage Dangling Participle. Fair enough. You always want to be a sage? I cannot imagine doing anything different. I suppose in my youngest days I yearned for battle and glory like most boys I knew. Having now seen how short a soldier's life can be, I look back on that old calling, that old mindset, and laugh. So, what's your story then? What do you mean by that? I mean, I know you're smarter than you act. Extend me the same courtesy. Lantry strokes his beard, leaving flecks of sepia among his white whiskers. I was on the take from the voices of Narat, or at least an agent of his sent me to the School of Ink and Quill 30 years back. It'd be years later until I made the connection to the Archon. Most people think the war began 3 years ago, but the voices of Narat had his hands in things sooner than that. I was part of that early invasion. An eager kid happy to accept the 30-year assignment that comes with an education. So, you advocating surrender to Kairos was the end of that long plan? Yes and no. When I first left, I was just happy to be getting educated by the sages on someone else's rings, and my orders were simply to listen and report. As the time drew near, my commands were to win them over, a little at a time, to the notion of surrender. But I failed. The elders of the school grew defiant, and the militant minds won out. These are tearsmen, after all. I didn't deliver the surrender, and it took the Overlord's edict to end what I was sent to do. What else aren't you telling me? You read the Edict of Fire. You were the messenger of Kairos' judgment on my work. It was about then that I decided I'd need to take an interest in your scheme. In truth, I'm deeply curious about any who've lived as vessels to Kairos' most supreme magic. When I heard you were proclaiming a second edict, I had to find a way for us to meet. Being tied up in a prisoner camp was not the intended plan. Well, thank you for telling me. Now, no more secrets, understood? I will endeavor to earn your trust as best I can. Sorry to have given you reason for doubt. Did Narat have you captured because of your failure there? The Archon of Secrets didn't even remember me. I guess I looked at some thug the wrong way and got jumped. My imprisonment isn't anything more interesting than that. Yeah, that sounds believable, honestly. How do you feel about Kairos? How could I not help but find him to be the most captivating person alive? The man has bent empires, claimed continents. Where he goes, history follows. I won't deny he has killed millions, at least, but I contend more would have died in petty wars across Taratus in the void of Kairos. I've seen what tiny despots, merchant cabals, and mage guilds can inflict in the names of all sorts of righteous causes. I'll take the rule of Kairos over the tyranny of every idiot on Taratus.
I am nothing if not a semi-reliable font of knowledge.
All right, how about arcane
What
matters?
did you... And I'd be happy to oblige. Ever since the fall of the Vellum Citadel, it is hard to find someone with whom I can discuss such things.
What do you know about Kairos' edicts? Kairos has cast many over the ages, and to my knowledge has never worded 2 edicts exactly the same. Edicts defy our understanding of magic. Kairos' magic works over vast distances, over indefinite durations, and no archon or mere mage can counter the force of an edict. What can you tell of them generally? I explain it to my students like this. A spell is to an edict as a drop of rain is to a hurricane. Edicts and spells are both magical cantrips, but differ in intensity by orders of magnitude. Edicts are almost commands to Taratus that must be carried out until the instructions allow for the magic to end. If Kairos wants a plague until next Judge's Day, they expect copious buboes until next Judge's Day. Nothing has ever dispelled an edict, nothing outside of the edict's own sunset clause, as I like to think of them. Curious about a specific edict. Of course, X, go away. Well, any thoughts about this edict of execution? It seems like the Archons were about to kill each other, and the threat of mutual destruction was about all Kairos had left. I imagine fear is the only way to get someone like the voices of Narat to follow orders, and the edict certainly did whip them into action. How about the Edict of Stone? The Edict of Stone ravaged the realm of Azure. The upheaval of earth and rock turned the rolling plains into a craggy steppe known as the Stone Sea. Since the edict was directed at the traitorous Archon of Stone, it would seem the upheaval of Azure was a secondary consequence, though I imagine little of what Kairos does is unintentional. Edict of Fire? Are you asking to salt an old wound? I remember the terror of waking to screams. I remember leaving behind my tractatus and tomes, leaving my birds to cook, my students to choke on smoke. I know it was Kairos that cast the edict, not you. It's like being mad at the carrying pigeon instead of the author. It's just odd to be so close to your voice all day, knowing that's the voice that brought the Vellum Citadel to ruin. Well, I had a sacred duty from Kairos. I can't be sorry for doing my job. Nor should you be, and it seems like you have a sense for just how complex your role is. To proclaim an edict is to be the tangible face of massive rumination. We all know the name Kairos, but who even knows his eye color? You, on the other hand, we can all remember in our minds with relative clarity. How about the Edict of Storms? The Edict of Storms turned the once forested lands of Stalwart into a windswept wasteland. They call it the Blade Grave now, since only the iron and bronze armaments remain. Hurricane breezes, rust winds, and relentless lightning have destroyed the housing and farmlands. Alright. Do edicts work on the same arcane principles as spellcraft and other magic?
Edicts are the strongest manifestation of magic we know, and they seem to violate all other lesser phenomena. No dispel cantrip has ever dented or abated an edict. Even archons with powers of great durability cannot shrug off their effects. Just look at Cairn.
Yeah.
Now, what I find curious, edicts can flex a little. Or so my studies suggest this is the case. Take the Edict of Storms. While the day it was proclaimed was the most violent, the actual radius of the storm has changed over time. But most will have none of my hypotheses on this matter.
Alright, well, what's your conjecture?
So, in my studies, some edicts resolve some problem of the overlords and then vanish into history. But the edicts that linger around, almost all of them begin to widen. Their effects become more intense. Here's the intriguing part. The older the edict, and the more that's written about it, the more the reports of that edict get more dire over time.
Are you sure it's not just legends? Each generation tells them bigger?
True, I could just be overreacting to sloppy record-keeping, but my hunch is that there's some correlation going on here. I contend that edicts are powered by fear. Fear of Kairos helps fuel the casting, and fear of the edict feeds the magic, sustaining it, and if enough people fear it, even growing it a bit.
It could also be that the edict feeds off the landscape once set in motion. Look what's become of Azure and Stalwart.
I thought just that. But wherever an edict is cast or has been cast, the land will always hum with a little background noise, if your ears trained to listen. If anything, it seems edicts add more magic into the world, not the other way around.
Interesting.
Intellectual honesty demands that I study the matter more. If I'm correct, the more people fear and obsess over an edict, the stronger it becomes. Anyway, another study for another time.
That is good to know.
And I'd be happy to oblige. Ever
You know
since
the magic of
fall
the
of the
Archons.
Vellum.
I've studied many of the Archons for many years. Compared to the other sages, I'm an expert on the subject. Which is sad, because I feel like I've still so much to learn. How does the magic of the Archons work? The Archons all have magical powers that are intuitive. When the voices of Narat pulls out someone's mind, or Graven Ash protects his soldiers, that magic isn't assigned to spell or ritual. To them, it's closer to flexing one's hand. Archons are the... what's the word for it? Axiom of magic? The root of magic? Spell pioneers? Well, every guild or school of magic will ascribe differently a different name to the theory. All mages inevitably stumble upon an inescapable fact. Only the Archons can will magic into being. Everyone else can only cast magic by invoking the sigil of an Archon that's come before. None know how the Archons do their magic. It seems to be different with each Archon, but theory suggests that once an Archon starts to invoke their powers, anyone else who comes after that Archon could, with the proper knowledge, tap into that power with the proper sigil and know-how. This observed law has given rise to a common question from young students. How could one guess at a sigil of an Archon not yet born, or not remembered by history, or simply unknown to the caster, and successfully cast a spell? Experienced mystics would tell you this is impossible, for they know that it's not enough to just mimic the gestures of a sigil. One must have willful, conscious knowledge of the Archon and the intended power being channeled. I see. Now, I'm sure this analogy is off in many ways, but I see Archons as the mothers of original magic, and everyone else is just imitating them. To confuse things a bit, some Archons learn to cast other spells in the same fashion as us lesser mages. If you're as important as an Archon, you learn quick that all knowledge is power. I've studied many of the Archons for many years. Compared to the other sages, I'm an expert on the subject, which is sad, because I feel like I've still so much to... Oh, I've heard that already. Are all Archons loyal to Kairos? Officially, yes. In actuality, no. Those with the true gift for magic always come to the attention of Kairos. A few manage to evade attention for a bit. The School of Tides was founded by one such uncontrollable, but these are history's exceptions. Occulted Jade, Archon of Tides, never bowed to Kairos, and it's said she survived the assassins sent to silence her. It makes her flight from Kairos before the war all the more troubling. We knew her as this symbol of strength, but when threatened, her weaker nature won. When we write biographies of the Archons, we often refer to them as exarchs in their formative years before stepping into their prime. But officially, Kairos is supposed to grant all titles of Archon. It's quite the faux pas to self-appellate. Exactly why Jade insisted on calling herself Archon of Tides. She didn't need Kairos' approval to wear the title she deserves, and I know she loved the fact that doing so must have annoyed Kairos. Fair enough. How is an Archon born or bred? I think we all dream of one day waking up and being an Archon. Given some of the madmen and loons that have exhibited mystical greatness, it can seem unfair that the rest of us can't do it. I can say with confidence that Archons aren't born, they become. Graven Ash is a good study of this. Before he was the Archon of War, he was a successful commander, each victory more daring and glorious than the last. Or than the next. But last would be more appropriate. Somewhere along the way, his leadership took on mystical qualities. The Graven Ash we know today can reach out and protect his soldiers from harm, but maybe at first he could just protect those near him. I wouldn't know for certain, but all will attest that he didn't have this power his whole life. Alright.
And I'd be happy to oblige.
What do you know of spellcraft?
Ever since... I've forgotten more than most blood chanters have ever learned. What do you want to know?
What sort of magic did the sages teach you? Sage Sindon tutored me in the traditional sigils, those of preservation, concealment, and healing, as derived from the bygone archons of Theravis, Fading Wrath, and the Orphan Midwife. The preservation magic is largely functional, sealing parchment, binding books, that sort of thing. All of us chroniclers learned concealment magic, as our ideal method would be to study events without contaminating the decisions being made. As for the healing magic, many of us modern sages study this a great deal. The school has a shoddy reputation among the common folk. I figure if they knew us as healers and caregivers, maybe we would start to change opinions. Healing is a noble craft. True, but given how accident-prone I can be, I think the person that benefits most from my magic is me. But certainly the most gratifying spells I know are the ones that ease pain and suffering. They make me feel slightly useful. Can you tell me about signing magic? Scholars don't have a good word for what Archons do when they cast magic. Couldn't tell you how Graven Ash casts his protection over his soldiers, now but I know how Bleeding Mark consciously decides to move through a shadow. Ooh, I don't know if we've read this one before. Bleeding Mark is Kairos' knife in the shadows, the unseen drop of poison that enforces the Overlord's will. He reports to Tunon the Adjudicator, serving in his capacity as the final word to those who hold Kairos' law in contempt. Few know the origin of the Archon of Shadows, or how Kairos maintains a hold on him. Those who anger the Archon never live long past sunset. But when us mere mages want to cast a spell, we do so by signing the sigil of an Archon that previously discovered the magical phenomenon in question. It's debated whether Archons create new magic or just discover magic that was waiting for us, but such questions seem impossible to answer while sober. Can you teach me anything?
Most certainly. I probably should have shown you how to mend wounds sooner. If you have a moment, I can show you the healing sigil I was trained to use.
Well, absolutely. No time like the present. Rummaging through his satchels, the sage produces a long quill and a crumpled piece of parchment. With 7 quick strokes of the quill, he inks a pattern on the page. We'll start with first principles. When mending wounds and easing pain, we invoke the magic of the Orphan Midwife, Archon of Rebirth. By invoking her sigil, we channel her mastery, however briefly, through our hands. Now trace the sigil, following the lines in the order I sketched them. Now, trust me, Lantry, I'm a bit of a natural at this sort of... Well, what can you tell me about the Archon of Rebirth? Oh, didn't realize you gave a care about your history. Well, the Orphan Midwife was born in 160, bowed to Kairos in 201. They say where she walked, plants would sprout, the sick would grow vigorous. She'd also send most folks into fits of rage and animals into heat. She sounds like quite a riot. We know her magic by way of one of her first disciples who migrated to the Tiers in 222 to spread her wisdom, an act that happened to be illegal under Kairos' law. For that and a host of other transgressions, the Orphan Midwife has been imprisoned for over a century, or so the story goes. Alright, trust me, Lantry, I'm a bit of a natural at this sort of thing. Youth and confidence. Where you find one, you often find the other. And let me tell you one thing I know for sure. Hubris and magic don't mix. Still, if you're eager to learn, that's music to my ears. I don't know if I've seen us gain loyalty and fear simultaneously before. Since this isn't your first cantrip, I'll move a little quickly, but I think you can keep up. Lantry walks you through countless repetitions of the signing of the mystic sigil. For hours you wave your hand in the air to no effect, until at last you sign the pattern in the air and feel a rush of power through your veins. Okay. Well, 5 skill ranks to control life. That's something. And so if you need to heal pain as opposed to purge an infection, you'd move your hand like so. But you know, that's enough for now, and I think the rest you can figure out on your own. Thanks, Lantry. Wait, I'm not actually done talking to you.
One moment, my friend. Just let me finish this thought.
Ending his note with a flourish, Lantry licks the tip of the quill, pausing to taste it a second and third time, before tucking the pen in a holster on his sleeve. You should stop doing that, Lantry. More questions.
I am nothing if not a simple, and
we've
I'd
done
be
with-
happy
yeah.
to oblige.
Are you familiar
Ever
with the
since
old
the
walls?
fall of familiar is a relative term. I think I know more than most, but it's a subject of mystery, even to the scholars. Though, I must admit, in addition to my reading, I've ventured into the old walls on occasion, and soiled many undergarments in the process.
Do you know who built them, or why? We can only seem to agree that they were built. There's no consensus as to the who of it. We generally use the old realms or older realms when describing the folk that must have done all this construction ages ago. That's also where the young realms got their name indirectly. Azure, Stalwart, and all them are older than you and I, but compared to the old walls, they're babies. As for the why, that's anybody's guess. I've always assumed it's an ancient road and aqueduct network. If you just needed to fence off your neighbors, you wouldn't have such elaborate, expansive masonry on the inside. What sorts of things have you seen in there? Aside from the terrifying Bane, well, every section of the old walls has its own jaw-dropping architecture. I've seen bridges that move when someone is near, mystical barriers that must have been standing for eons. And I've seen remains, so many remains. A lot of them sages from centuries past, or hapless drifters that must have been desperate for shelter. What fascinates me most are the symbols found in the interior architecture. I can't help but think if we shared notes with other old walls explorers, we might someday decipher the meanings. Kairos forbids exploration of the old walls. Did the Tearsmen have similar laws? In typical Younger Realms fashion, entering the old walls was never illegal, but plundering them was. The logic being that which rests in the old walls belongs to your local ruler, not you. The noble houses made a point of buying up anything that came out of the old walls. Plenty of ancient stuff in there, but sometimes you find stuff that's just a generation old, left by the last fool trying to search for treasure. So you must be familiar with the Bane, then. More so than is healthy. I've seen one rip a young scribe in half with its nebulous talons, and I've run away from more than my fair share of angry Bane. That sounds redundant. They all seem angry. Heard all sorts of theories on the Bane. Heard they were dead mages, the nightmares of Archons come to life. One sage believes they're Kairos' children. Guess if you have enough ink and parchment, you can crap out any dumb idea. I profess to know very little and stick to what can be observed. They appear cunning, but lacking language, and they have animal-like qualities, but they seem drawn only to magic and commotion. Food and water seem irrelevant to them. Interesting. Well, clearly the old walls and spires are like the deeper, big mystery of this setting.
And I'd be happy to oblige.
But do you know about the
Ever
spires?
since the
History used to say that the older realms built the spires. These days you'll hear children repeating that Kairos built them. Guess that's the new history? There are spires all over Taratus, though I don't know the count. Maybe 40 or so? 5 of them are in the tiers, and generally the spires follow the old walls, often occurring at junctions in the old masonry. The mountain spire is a notable exception. The other spires in the tiers connect to the old walls, but the mountain spire is just freestanding, a sore thumb in the middle of the tiers. Any idea as to their purpose? Lightning rod, perch from which to survey the lands below, signposts for a society of folks that flew like birds. On this matter I have only conjecture and flights of fancy. The best hypothesis I've heard is that they were all built at the sites of major settlements now long gone, so maybe their haphazard placement is a hint about how the maps of old might have looked. Any idea why magic works better near them? The sages liken the phenomenon to heat radiating from a candle. The air is just thicker with magic the closer you get to the spire. It can be deadly trying to work spells close to a spire if you aren't wise to the effect. I'd be famous if I could tell you why this happened. I've always assumed they're the magical equivalent of river sources. Just as water endlessly flows from certain special sites, so too are there places where magic pours endlessly from a natural source. Any idea who built this whole thing on top of the mountain spire? Know any sculptors with superhuman strength and the power to fly? If not, I'm out of ideas. Structurally speaking, it looks vaguely, and I do mean vaguely, similar to the sculptures in the old Academy of Tides, but if that were the case, I think we'd know more. I also noticed the resemblance, but I can assure you that if it was built by an old tidecaster, it was the best-kept secret in a school that prided itself on showmanship and boasting about your exploits. Oh, So you studied the art of it being insufferable, and here I thought it was a natural gift. The symbols on the structure certainly look like they could be related to the symbols found in the old walls, so I'm all but certain that structure was built by the same craftsman that built the spire.
And I'd be happy to oblige.
Okay. Wait.
I am nothing if not a semi-reliable
questions about our allies and
font of
enemies.
Well, you might want to ask a more soldierly type about the armies, but do you want to talk about the Archons or other mages?
What do you know about the Archons? I know much of such luminaries, so I'm careful with my words. But ask if you must. Tell me about Graven Ash, Archon of War.
Ash has served with Kairos for a mere century, but he has been a reliable general and level-headed warlord. Certainly when compared to some of the more bloodthirsty Archons to serve under Kairos. I'm not saying the disfavored are merciful. I'm just saying I've read the stories of the Archon of Blood and know it could be worse.
Yeah, that sounds worse.
I know Graven Ash can defend his soldiers from far away. Ash's Aegis is the term us Arcanophiles have taken to calling it. Not surprisingly, Graven Ash is beloved by his troops. I mean, if Tunon could mystically protect you from cudgels and sharp sticks from leagues away, you'd like him more.
Yeah, probably. Tell me about the Voices of Norat, Archon of Secrets. The Voices of Norat is one of Kairos' most dangerous and unpredictable servants. They can pull memories, whole personalities, if you believe some reports, from his victims, and over time this has created a single Archon with the knowledge of countless lifetimes. He and I were in written contact as part of the taking of the Vellum Citadel. Though I exchanged very few words with him, it was readily apparent that the Voices of Norat doesn't see people, he sees uses. How about Tunon, Archon of Justice? First, I suppose I should ask what you know of him. He is true to his core mission. He is fair and just. Fair and just by your measure, that is. Tunon, Archon of Justice, exists in texts spanning back hundreds of years. I can't say I know how he came to be the Overlord's adjudicator. Maybe you know that one. But he oversaw the conquest of the Tundra Sovereigns, and they bowed to Kairos in the year 83. Well, so he's old. And he does justice. He's kind of one of Kairos' right-hand dudes. How about Bled and Mark, Archon of Shadows? Very little. His name is not printed in many texts. I know that he's sworn to Tunon and acts as his assassin. I know he goes back a long ways, though. I've long assumed he's served Kairos about as long as Tunon, give or take. And there's some of the originals, yeah. But about Siren, Archon of Song?
Not the youngest Archon in history, but certainly one of the younger, and history has yet to write much about her. And if I happen to be the first to write about her, well, that will look nice for my legacy.
Fair enough. That didn't tell me anything, though. But she works for the Voices of Norat, as I recall. Recruiting for him. Did you know Cairn, the Archon of Stone? Of him, I know very little. I believe he was the wild man of the hills that Graven Ash subdued in 402, but only one source suggests that link. He was famous for being, well, a big sour jerk. Seems he let his mouth run off about Kairos, and that was the end of his story. Alright.
I am nothing if not a semi... Well,
how about the Mage's
you
Guilds?
might want to...
More than I will readily admit. Which guild? What do you know about the Earthshakers? It takes a strange bird to wish to emulate Cairn, Archon of Stone, but what do I know? A whole cult sprang up to worship the man. This cult became known as the Earthshakers Guild, and even their weak imitations of his magic can fill the land with tremors. Cairn answered to Graven Ash, meaning the Earthshakers are military allies of the disfavored. At least that is how it was. Cairn's treachery demanded retribution from Kairos, and this has destroyed the reputation of the Earthshaker Guild. Many would assume a traitorous teacher would breed traitorous disciples. How about the Forgebound? The Forgebound are a guild from the Northern Empire. Their magic is a bit different from the sigils you or I know. They study a slower, more rigid style of magic that they use to become one with their forging tools. The Forgebound know the secret of turning grey rock into fine iron, and none have yet replicated this feat of craftsmanship. What they do is truly unique, and they teach their craft by practice and lecture. Little of it is written down. How about the Blood Chanters? Now, the Blood Chanters are a motley. To call them a proper guild insults all other traditions. Most of their number were members of the School of Wild Wrath, but they sold their loyalty to the Voices of Norat. Yeah, we kind of saw that during the conquest, right? Okay, they draw their magic from the sigil of Siren, the Archon of Song, and Thousand Empires, Archon of Fire, so they added more after they I mean, originally they were the School of Wild Wrath and did fire, but they added song as well. They brought with them their fire magic, adopted from the long-dead Thousand Embers Archon of Fire. One of the most influential but briefly lived Archons born in the Tiers. Thousand Embers, Archon of Fire, had a knack for making things combust and a strong motivation to assist his fellow man. A fact of great relief to most, as none of the local lords could pay their soldiers enough to apprehend him had he cared to use his powers for extortion or destruction. Obsessed more with writing, he penned a number of exploring inner fire, the human drive to eat, reproduce, and destroy, containing a great deal of introspection on his own use of fire. When he disappeared in 73 TR, it took all of 3 years for a cabal of mages to appear, claiming to be the true inheritors of his power. This School of Wild Wrath had a rough understanding of Thousand Embers' command of fire, but rough was enough. Fire is not a medium that calls for finesse. While the School of Wild Wrath have long told the story that Thousand Embers is literally living as a Thousand Embers, waiting to reconstruct himself when the time is right, a few of the Fatebinders who work very closely with Bled and Mark happen to know the Archon of Shadows made the rare gesture of inviting him 3 times to join with Kairos before offering an ultimatum ending in, or die. Gotcha, so he was assassinated by Bled and Mark. I guess it's of little surprise that fire mages would find a welcome home in the chorus. But fire is now but one of their tricks. Their real trick is their magic of passion, frenzy, and fear. Such magic is based on the sigil of Siren, Archon of Song. So Narat doesn't really have his own sigil, at least not that has been talked about. Are there other guilds in the Tiers? Oh, the big 3, Ink, Tide, and Wrath, pushed out most of the other schools ages ago. History makes note of the Cutters, the School of Flowering Winter, and a few others that did not survive the little wars our schools would wage. But I know little of these footnote schools. Okay, so the Ink did actually fight wars with Tide and Wrath, so that's why he doesn't like her much.
Well, you might want to ask a more soldierly. I am nothing if not a semi-reliable
what can you
font
tell me
of
about the
knowledge.
School of Ink and Quill?
You mean what's left of them? What would you like to know?
What's the core philosophy of the School of Ink and Quill?
The sages are archivists, academicians, and arcanists. Our mission is to preserve the knowledge of today for the good of tomorrow. Though we are known for our magic, few realize that most sages concern themselves with scribal work. Only a select few have the talent or focus to work the sigils. Each sage benefited from the scrolls of learning that came before him, and so each sage must repay this boon by gathering, authoring, or translating new texts to the stacks.
So they're academics.
But all that's a bit generous. It's no secret that the sages were far more happy to add knowledge than to share it.
Yeah. Why did they resist Kairos?
Why, indeed. As historians, it is our place to document, not direct. Let others rage and resist. Ours is the duty to record. The decision to defy Kairos was not unanimous, nor one decided upon lightly. The laws of Kairos would forbid much of the knowledge contained in the Vellum Citadel. The elder sages feared, rightly perhaps, that the Overlord would put an end to our tradition of stockpiling knowledge. The Battle of the Vellum Citadel was a battle to preserve knowledge, but our actions will be remembered as treason against the will of Kairos.
Tell me a bit about the school's history.
The sages trace their days to a generation after 5 Wives, when the first settlers moved west. The Vellum Citadel began as a scholastic retreat, slowly blossoming into the finest library in the continent across the generations.
What's this? 5 Wives is the name for both the historical landfall of seafaring human settlers on the Tiers, as well as the name for the archipelago where the first, now largely abandoned, settlements were founded. In centuries past, the historic event was known more properly as the 5 Wives and the 7 Husbands, for as the story goes, 7 ships made landfall, and after 2 seasons of difficult living, the 7 husbands got back on their boats and see what else was nearby, and all perished. Many suggest this is just a parable used to explain the gender roles of land ownership and admiralty in the Tiers, but the nobility take the origin story quite seriously, and nearly every noble house in the Tiers has a family mythology linking them back to these 5 fabled matriarchs. I see.
The centuries fly by, and suddenly, the Vellum Citadel is the definitive archive in the Tiers. The sages branched out into carrying missives for wealthy clients, training noble children to read. The peasants may have feared us, but we remained useful enough to the kings and queens of the Tiers to avoid war.
Makes sense.
When Kairos came for the Tiers, That's when our hubris came back to haunt us. The Elder Sages, the other Elder Sages, not I, believed our spellcraft was enough to ward off any siege. Well, we know how that turned out.
What sort of sigils do the sages practice?
Traditionally, we use magic only so that we may observe and archive. So that means magic of concealment and protection. But, in truth, we have amassed a great wealth of knowledge. Before the Vellum Citadel fell, any given subject of magic had at least one sage practicing it.
So you're admitting you had at least one agent of yours studying the magic of the Tidecasters?
Whoops.
Well, I mean, if such information had fallen into our hands generations ago, we'd be fools not to...
Not to suckle off that ill-gotten teat of knowledge? Filthy word whores of the worst degree. The Edict of Fire wasn't half of what you deserved.
Well, I can see this going to constructive places. Maybe we should both drop it.
What would you like to know?
Alright, I think that's it for the magic
I am nothing
then.
if not a semi-reliable font of
They say
knowledge.
sages know all sorts of things. What does this imply?
I know everything, except for who's been saying that. What's on your mind?
You know anything about history? Bro, that's such a ridiculously general question.
I'm flattered you think me that wise, but unless you are enthralled by migration observations and titillated by triangle ratios, I think I'd bore you silly.
But what better tangent than triangles?
Fine, fine. If you have truly nothing better to do than talk trivia with old Lantry, so be it.
Lantry pops open a scroll case by his hip, producing a long, handwritten manuscript.
A Brief History of the Tears by Sage Lantry. Volume 1, Settlers from the East. Dry land! Came the cry from the prow of the ship. After months in the deep ocean, the pioneers of the Tears saw their promised land at long last.
This would actually be quite interesting if not for the fact that he's so slow about reading it. Fascinating.
Volume 3, years 90 to 94. If you thought 88 was a crazy time when everything changed, wait until 91.
Haunting memories of Tunon's lectures creep into your mind. See, the thing is, I have a degree in history. I'm actually interested in this. Really, do go on.
Well, if you enjoyed that, you're going to love Ratios of the Sun. So, by using the shadow of a staff at noon as a starting point, I used triangles to show a relation.
Oh god, we're doing math now? No, stay away from that, Lantry. Unlike Tunon, Lantry cannot kill you for walking out of a lecture, and unlike Tunon, Lantry has to eventually sleep. You've experienced worse. But were your two measurements far enough to derive a parallax?
Ah, I knew someone would ask that. And yes, so here's my proof. Sage winding script shows a relationship between all half-square triangles. I have a diagram somewhere.
From time to time, the wind picks up. The howling, biting breeze offers a momentary respite from the deluge of blather. So if that's correct, you could estimate almost any length from a no angle?
Yes. Way to steal the concluding reveal from me. But yeah, that's about the gist of it. Now, if you'll excuse me,
Outlasted him.
I think my voice needs rest. Thank you for the rousing conversation.
Okay, anything else, Lantry?
One moment, my friend. Just let me finish this thought.
Okay, same thing.
I am nothing if not I know everything.
Anything about the Bane?
Except
Kinda
for
already
who's
asked
been
this.
set.
A shame Sage Cloven Claws was reduced to a pile of ash. Man knew all that's been written on the subject. Most of what we know is summed up in the name. The full term for them is Mage Bane, and there's a good reason for it. They'll prey on anything that moves, but they'll show favoritism toward magically active humans. Alright, tell me about... We're obviously going to have to fight Bane at some point. It hasn't come up at all yet, but we're obviously going to. Tell me about Wisps. Wisps are largely inconsequential by themselves, hardly the menace most associated with the Bane, but these glowing little creatures often follow in the wake of Scourges or other larger Bane, and that can make them a real danger. What do you know about Scourges? Writhing masses of sharpened limbs, and quiet as a shadow, Scourge is the most frequently observed type of Bane. Not sure if they're the most numerous, or just the most likely to attack. What about Havocs? Havocs are notable for being territorial. By all accounts, they stick to a chosen location and lurk, and lurk. If you see one, common wisdom is to run. It'll give up chase eventually when you find the edge of its home. Know anything about the Malices? The most troublesome of the Mage Bane are the Malices. Though I've never experienced it, I'm told a Malice can take hold of your waking self, leave you trapped in a dream while it puppets you. If evidence that these creatures didn't predate Kairos, I'd think the Overlord the only creature powerful and cruel enough to breed the Malice. Fascinating. You know where they all come from? They seem to breed in the Old Walls, or at least that's where they exist in the highest concentration. But there seems to be no social interaction amongst the Bane, and no logical mechanism of, grinding their privates to make little Banes.
I know everything.
How about the
Except for
Beastmen?
who's been... My knowledge is largely academic, not to be mistaken for practical.
Well, do you know their origins?
The earliest settlers made note of the Beastmen, so they were here before us, but not before the older realms. By all accounts, the tribes do not have record of a time before the Old Walls. So, the logical conclusion is that they arrived after the Old Realms, but before Five Wives.
Fair enough. What about the tribes?
There have been thousands of tribes throughout history. Most dissolve within a Quireman's lifespan. The stronger females branch off and make their own tribes with tougher names. Then the King of Azure rounds you up and puts you to work. The Stonestalkers are the most powerful of remaining tribes, thriving now that Azure has fallen. As for the rest, the old Talons of Frozen Cloud, the Trollhooks, the Kolakar, the Katvanas, the Jawsnap, all gone, I think. And then there's the Shadowhunters. They're all but extinct.
What do you know of their minds and mannerisms?
They are true to their names and live like beasts. Clothing and artifice seem to have little value to them, whereas rutting and killing are the reason they wake in the morning. But it would be a mistake to think them stupid. Ask any tamer and they'll tell you some stories of their cunning. The beasts are wanting in patience and diplomacy, but they are a clever bunch.
Alright, where do their loyalties rest?
You'd want to ask the authority, Sage Quillborn. She lived with the Kolakar for a few span back in 404. Some truly fascinating findings. She noted that every successful tribe has a singular female leader. It's Prima. She noted that beastmen show fluid loyalty to new matrons. They adapt well to changing leaders, but they never change the relatively simple but strict hierarchical model. Few beastmen have accepted fealty to Kairos. It would seem the notion of bowing to a person you have not seen in the flesh is insanity. This inability to bow to the Overlord will no doubt doom the species, for Kairos does not suffer such token insults.
That might be true, actually. Okay.
I know everything,
That's
except
it.
for
That's
who's
all for now. Thanks, Lantry. Well, that was a long chat. Okay.
1 moment, my friend.
Yeah, that's it. Okay. Okay, I learned the Sigil of Life spell core. Oh, that's handy, so I can make my own healing spells. Thanks for watching, sailors. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, consider leaving a like or subscribing. New parts will be up every other day on YouTube, or you can watch live on Twitch. Have a nice day, sailors. This is Sea Lord Janda, signing off.